Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at the top 5 bellwether House seats that will give us a good indication on election night of where the midterms are headed. So all of these districts are going to be located on the eastern seaboard. I did that on purpose because these are the states that are going to have their polls closing the earliest, so we'll have the best indication within an hour or so or a couple of hours of how the midterms are actually shaping up. Of course, we've seen a lot of the polling. Republicans have been surging in the generic ballot. They're starting to surge in a lot of these swing states. But will it actually manifest in real votes on election night? And that's the real question we're going to go into tonight. We're going to take a look at these 5 districts. And each of these districts, I think, has good variation in them, and it's one of the reasons why I chose them. Some of them are more Biden-leaning, some of them are more Republican-leaning, some have incumbents, some don't. So it's really a small mosaic to get a more complete picture of how the midterm races will shape up when we actually start to see results come in. So, of course, we're going to take a look at all of these House districts. We're going to take a look at some of the polling in some of these key races and how forecasters are currently projecting these races. And, of course, I'll give my take on what I think Republicans need to have a good night in these districts, or what Democrats need to have in order to sort of stave off this red wave that's being forecasted by a lot of election analysis. So we're going to take a look at all of that in just a second. But first, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing down below and liking this video if you enjoy. Link down below to our election night live stream. We were just 8 days away from the midterm elections, so be sure to join us on election night. You don't want to miss it. We'll be releasing the channel's Discord in just a few days, still trying to get that set up, and of course we'll be looking for moderators on the YouTube chat and Discord and such. So if you're interested in that, stay tuned. I'll release updates on that going forward. So anyway, let's get straight into the video. We'll start off with the first district on this list, New Hampshire's 1st congressional district. Now, this is probably the bluest of the districts we're going to talk about tonight. This is a Biden plus 5 district, and this is a district that I think is probably the hardest for the GOP to capture, and I'll explain why that is in just a couple of minutes. Of course, we take a look at New Hampshire's 1st congressional district. It is a Biden plus 5.7 district. It got slightly redder during redistricting, but it's still not exactly a red district. It is a lean Democratic district, at least according to the 2020 results. Of course, in 2016, the same district probably voted very narrowly, maybe for Hillary Clinton, or even perhaps even slightly for Donald Trump. But if we take a look at how this district voted back in the 2020 election, of course, New Hampshire as a whole voted for Joe Biden by 7.3%. But if we take a look at the 1st congressional district, which again was a Biden plus 6 district, Chris Pappas, the incumbent here, only won this race by 5.1%. So he did slightly underperform Joe Biden's margin in the district, and it proves that this district is slightly redder down ballot. Now, I certainly think incumbent Democrat Chris Pappas is vulnerable. Of course, if we take a look at some of the polling we have out of this race so far, we've got a number of interesting ratings. Some have rated this as lean Republican RCP. Of course, Decision Desk, FiveThirtyEight, other sources have put this as lean or even likely Democratic. The polling for this race currently has Pappas up by 4.9 in the polling average, and he's leading in every single poll. So this is actually the district out of all of them, like I said, that I think is the furthest out of reach for the GOP. So obviously, if it looks like the Democrats are going to hold this district on election night, that is a good sign for them. That sort of indicates that the red wave isn't as strong as a lot of analysts were thinking it was, because if this really is an R+4 environment, it's very likely that Republicans will end up flipping this seat. Of course, not everything comes down to the national environment. It is a factor, but it's not the only factor. But New Hampshire does tend to be a very swingy state. So if there is going to be a sort of wave, we would expect it to somewhat be manifested in the state of New Hampshire. So this is the 1st district I would certainly keep an eye on election night. Again, polls close in New Hampshire fairly early. We should get results out of there within a couple of hours. So if it looks like the Democrats are going to hold on to this seat, better night for Democrats. If it looks like Republicans are going to flip this seat, I would say it's a very good night for the GOP. The 2nd district we're going to look at is Rhode Island's 2nd congressional district. Now, this is a district that voted for Joe Biden by 13 percentage points. So right off the bat, it really shouldn't be a district we're talking about so much, especially since this is Rhode Island. And, you know, this is a state that realistically should be out of reach for the GOP. But the circumstances of the midterm races, coupled with candidate quality in the district, I think gives the GOP a very unique opportunity to flip probably the bluest district they will probably win on election night if they do have a good night, and that's District 2. Again, we talked about Alan Fung a couple of times on this channel. He's the former Republican mayor of Cranston. He ran for governor twice in Rhode Island, both in 2014 and 2018. And currently he's running against State Treasurer Seth Magaziner for an open seat in Rhode Island 2nd. So as I mentioned earlier, I said New Hampshire would be slightly harder for the GOP to capture, and that's mainly because you're looking at a Democratic incumbent. In this case, you have an open seat with a very strong Republican running up against a pretty average Democrat, in my opinion. So it really is a 50-50 race. It's certainly a coin toss. But if Republicans are winning in this race, it's a very good night for them, to say the least. Again, if we take a look at the polling out of this race, Alan Fung, the Republican, has led in every single poll except the latest poll that we have out of this race, which essentially has it as a tie. But again, this is probably a Democratic internal. This is a Democratic-leaning poll sponsored by the DCCC. So, it's showing a dead heat between Seth Magaziner and Alan Fung. Very likely, again, we've seen the polls sort of shifting away from Alan Fung as the race gets closer, as more voters are starting to vote more on party and less on name ID, because early on, Alan Fung had gigantic name ID in the 2nd Congressional District. He was leading Seth Magaziner by 15 points, and every poll since then has showed a much closer race. So this really is a coin toss. Again, in my prediction, I actually had this slightly favoring the Democrats because of its partisan lean, but if the Democrat internal is showing them tied, and perhaps if we see another poll with Alan Fung ahead, I would say Republicans would have the slight advantage in this seat. But if Republicans do actually manage to flip this seat, it's a gigantic deal. It'll be their first congressman from Rhode Island since the 1990s, and would really indicate, I think, a very strong environment for the Republicans, because while Alan Fung is a strong candidate that can appeal to moderates, he still can't win without good GOP turnout. And of course, if GOP voters are turning out in Rhode Island, they're certainly turning out in the rest of the country. So that's the 2nd district I would watch very closely on election night. The 3rd district we're going to take a look at is Pennsylvania's 7th. Now, the 7th district narrowly went to Joe Biden by less than a point, 0.6%. There is a Democratic incumbent, but this, out of all of the districts, is the most centrist district. This district essentially voted for Joe Biden by less than a point. It probably voted for Donald Trump by a point or so back in the 2016 election, if I had to guess, based on the shifts that we saw in Pennsylvania from 2016 to 2020. This is certainly probably the race I would watch the closest, because not only do the results in this district indicate potential control of the Senate, with, of course, the Oz race also on the ballot, but it also indicates how Republicans are doing in neutral congressional seats, in seats that Biden won by less than a point or Trump won by less than a point. I certainly think, given the midterm environment that we're going to see, I think it's less likely you're going to see these narrow Trump districts flip to Biden than you would Biden districts flipping to Trump. I think the GOP is going to have to flip narrow Biden districts to Trump if they're going to win the House in the first place. And I think one of the seats they do that in is Pennsylvania's 7th. Now, if we take a look at the polls for this district so far, the district did change. It got redder from 2020 to 2022. Of course, Biden won the old district, I believe, by about 5 points. Now he only won the current district by 0.6. A lot of people have been saying Susan Wild is dead on arrival, and I don't really agree with that categorization, because there's always a chance that she could still hold on to this seat. It's not like she's running in a Trump plus 10 district or something like that. But now you have safe red Carbon County in the district, whereas before it was really Lehigh County, Northampton, and then parts of Monroe. Now it's Lehigh, Northampton, and then Carbon County, which Carbon County is a county that Donald Trump won by over 30 percentage points. It was a county that he got 65% of the vote in. So super red county. That's one of the reasons why the district moved 4 points to the right. And high turnout in Carbon County and Northampton, these other areas, would certainly indicate bad news for the Democratic Party, because that means Republicans are super energized. So this is the 3rd race I would watch super closely. Again, this is probably, in my opinion, the 2nd most important race out of these 5 in terms of gauging the direction of where the country is going to go on election night. Again, there's many other toss-up districts on this map that are very important to the national environment, but if you want a good indication of where election night is going to head, these are the districts you'd pay attention to. So that's the 3rd one. The 4th one we're going to look at is Virginia's 2nd. This is a Biden plus 4 district with incumbent Democrat Elaine Luria against Republican challenger Jen Kiggans. Now, I think Jen Kiggans is a very strong candidate. She has the right optics, the right vibes for the sort of suburban district that she's representing, mainly Virginia Beach. But you also have these rural areas as well. She was involved in the Navy, so she does have a pretty good naval background, which is important for the 2nd Congressional District because it's a big part of the economy there in Hampton Roads. If we take a look at the polling for this district, so far it's really a dead heat in the latest poll. Christopher Newport has Elaine Luria up 45-45 on her challenger. Previous poll had her up by 5. That was from a Democratic-leaning poll. So there's only 2 candidates on the ballot, which means either one of these candidates is going to get a majority. RCP has this as a lean flip. The rest of the analysts have this as a toss-up. This, I think, is the number 1 seat to watch because it has a Democratic incumbent and it's a pretty narrow Biden district. It's a lean Biden district. Biden only won the 2nd Congressional District by, I believe, around 4 percentage points. So if Republicans are able to flip this district and they're able to flip it by a couple of points, 3 percentage points, I misspoke. If Republicans are able to flip this district by, say, a 5-point margin, a 6-point margin, they're in for a very good night because they're defeating a Democratic incumbent by a pretty decent margin. Now, Republicans should win this district either way. I'd be very shocked if Elaine Luria survives her re-election. But if Republicans are only winning this district by 2, maybe 3 percentage points, it might be an indicator that Republicans aren't going to do so well and Democrats might be able to hold their own more than a lot of analysts give them credit for. So this is another really important district. Again, it's very representative of the country. You've got urban parts of the district in Virginia Beach. You've got the suburbs of Virginia Beach, and then you have the rural areas on the Eastern Shore here and surrounding the Hampton Roads area. And finally, we get to the last district out of our top 5 that I would say are very important to watch on election night, and that is North Carolina's 13th Congressional District between Bo Hines and Wiley Nickel. Now, Bo Hines was touted as a very strong Republican candidate early on. In fact, Decision Desk HQ and 538 agree. They have this as likely Republican. This is a district that Biden only won by about 2 to 3 points, so it's a very narrow-leaning Biden district, and it certainly could trend back. And I guarantee you in 2016, this was the district that Donald Trump probably won. 1.8%, so essentially a 2-point margin for Joe Biden. Again, this is another really important bellwether because if Republicans are winning this is an open seat, so there's no incumbent. So Republicans should realistically be winning this seat by somewhere of 6 to 7 percentage points. If they're doing that, they're in for a really good night. There's really no excuse for the Republicans to do poorly in a district that barely voted for Biden and has no Democratic incumbent. So those are the top 5 districts I would watch on election night. Again, if we take a look at the polls here, Nickel has a slight lead, but there's a lot of undecideds. If I had to bet money, I would say that Bo Hines probably wins this race by about 5 or 6. I think that would line up pretty well with the generic ballot that I've predicted R+4. Could even be a stronger night. Again, if Hines is winning by 7, 8 percentage points, the Democrats should look out because that means that Republicans are really energized. And again, not all of these races are connected. Obviously, there's some races where Democrats are going to do better. Obviously, with their incumbents, they're not going to lose by 12 points in a Biden +1 district. I'd be very surprised if we saw something like that. But, all of these districts are important in some ways. Some are leaning more Democratic, some lean more Republican. Some have incumbents, some don't. None of them have Republican incumbents, which is one of the things I think will be key to the 2022 midterms. I don't think any Republican incumbents in these competitive districts will lose unless their district got significantly bluer. I think any Republican in a toss-up district now, a district that Biden won by less than 5 points, is going to hold on. Perhaps a bold prediction by me, but looking at what we've seen in previous elections back in 2020, when Republicans exceeded expectations in the House and ended up picking up, I believe, 12 seats in a year where some analysts said they were going to lose seats. I always defer to the national environment when I make these predictions, but this isn't really a prediction video. This is just to give you an overview of the seats that I think are the top 5 to watch on election night if you want a very early indicator of what's going to happen throughout the rest of the evening and the following days as ballots are tabulated. So again, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a thumbs up down below. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. And link down below to the election night live stream. Check that out. We'll have a big stream. Of course, if you're interested, the Discord will be coming out in a couple of days. I'll make an announcement about that when it happens in the community tab. As always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.